June 23rd, 1941. 08:20 hours. 3 kilometers west of Raseiniai, Lithuania. Oberleutnant Kurt Knispel watched the strange Soviet tank crest the hill through his commander's periscope. His Panzer III crew had already destroyed 6 Russian tanks that morning, obsolete T-26s and BT-7s that burned like matchboxes when the high-velocity shells punched through their riveted armor. This one looked different. Lower profile, odd sloping sides. "Range, 500 meters," his gunner called out. Knispel gave the order to fire. The 50mm shell struck the approaching tank dead center on its frontal armor. The crew heard the distinctive ping of a ricochet. The Soviet tank kept coming. Fire again. Another hit. Another ricochet. The enemy tank was now at 300 meters, its 76mm gun traversing toward them. "Reverse! Get us hull down!" The Soviet shell arrived first. It punched through the Panzer III's frontal armor like paper, detonated inside the fighting compartment, and turned Knispel's world into fire. He and his loader made it out through the hatches. His gunner and driver burned alive in the wreckage, their screams lasting perhaps 15 seconds before shock and smoke inhalation silenced them. Welcome to the Eastern Front, where German engineering superiority met Soviet practicality, and 80,000 German tankers learned the price of underestimation. The mockery. In the years before Operation to the coming from the Beth part, the "this week of 4 EML. The mockery. In the years before Operation to the coming from the Beth part, the "this week of 4 EML. The mockery. In the years before Operation to the coming from the Beth part, the "this week of 4 EML. Mockery. In the years before Operation Barbarossa, German tank officers studied intelligence reports on Soviet armor with barely concealed contempt. The T-34 looked crude to their eyes. Welded construction instead of precise German engineering, cast turret instead of machined components, broad tracks that seemed agricultural, no radio in most tanks, a cramped interior that sacrificed crew comfort. Bolshevik tractor, one Panzer officer reportedly called it in a pre-war briefing. German tankers had reason for confidence. They'd crushed Poland in weeks. They'd humiliated France, that supposed master of armored warfare, in 40 days. Their panzers were marvels of engineering, precisely machined components, excellent optics, radios in every tank for coordinated tactics, comfortable crew stations for sustained operations. The Panzer III and IV had vertical armor plating, beautifully crafted, easy to manufacture with skilled German labor. Their tanks looked like what tanks should look like: geometric, angular, industrial masterpieces. Soviet tanks looked like someone had designed them with a hammer and sickle instead of a slide rule. The Germans were half right. Soviet tank designer Mikhail Koshkin had indeed prioritized different values. Not precision for its own sake, not crew comfort, not the aesthetic satisfaction of German engineers. He'd designed the T-34 for a single purpose: to kill German tanks while surviving German guns. The design philosophy. Koshkin understood something the Germans initially didn't. The Eastern Front would not be a gentleman's war of maneuver and tactical elegance. It would be industrial slaughter conducted across endless space. Tanks would need to survive, to keep fighting after taking hits that would brew up a panzer. The sloped armor of the T-34 wasn't crude, it was revolutionary. A 45mm plate, angled at 60 degrees, provided the same protection as 90mm of vertical armor at half the weight. German shells that would penetrate vertical plate ricocheted off those sloped surfaces, their kinetic energy deflected harmlessly into the Russian sky. Those agricultural wide tracks? They distributed the T-34's weight across snow, mud and sand that swallowed German panzers with their narrow tracks, designed for paved roads. When the autumn rains turned Ukraine into an ocean of mud in October 1941, German tanks sank axle-deep while T-34s rolled past them. The diesel engine wasn't a sign of backwardness. It was a calculated choice. Diesel fuel didn't ignite as easily as the gasoline that powered German tanks. When a German shell penetrated a panzer's armor, vaporized gasoline often filled the crew compartment in milliseconds, followed by ignition. The crew had perhaps 5 seconds to escape before the flames consumed them. Soviet tankers called German panzers lighters because of how quickly they burned. The brutal education. Soviet Union proceeded with the expected efficiency, but the reports that reached Berlin grew increasingly disturbing. Panzer crews described encountering T-34s that shrugged off direct hits. Tank destroyers with 37mm guns found themselves completely useless. Even the 50mm guns on Panzer IIIs frequently failed to penetrate. General Heinz Guderian, perhaps Germany's finest armored warfare commander, wrote in his memoir, "The Russian T-34 tank was a significant surprise." This was the understatement of a man watching his doctrine crumble. German tankers developed desperate tactics: aim for the tracks to immobilize them, then maneuver for flank shots where armor was thinner, call in Stukas when available, use 88mm anti-aircraft guns in direct fire mode. The only German weapon that reliably penetrated T-34 armor in 1941. But the 88s were defensive weapons, and this was a war of advance. German tankers had to close with T-34s, had to engage them with their inadequate guns, had to watch their shells bounce off, while Soviet 76mm rounds punched through their armor and filled their fighting compartments with fire and fragmented steel. The casualty reports painted the picture in blood. A Panzer crew struck by a T-34 shell had approximately an 8% chance of the entire crew surviving. The penetrating round typically killed at least 2 men instantly, with blast and shrapnel. Fuel fires claimed the rest. Inside the inferno. Tank fires follow a predictable sequence. The penetrating shell creates overpressure that ruptures eardrums and damages lungs. Fragments of the shell casing and spalling from the interior armor wound or kill crew members. If ammunition is struck, secondary explosions detonate, often blowing the turret completely off the hull. But the true horror is the fire. Vaporized fuel ignites within seconds. The cramped crew compartment, designed to minimize the tank's profile, becomes a furnace. Exit hatches, if they haven't been blown shut or jammed by the initial impact, offer escape for those still conscious and not trapped by injury. Surviving German tankers described the sound: a whooshing ignition followed by screaming. The smell: burning fuel, burning rubber, burning flesh. The sight: crew members on fire, throwing themselves from hatches, rolling in mud or snow to extinguish flames that had already consumed their uniforms and skin. Wehrmacht field hospitals on the Eastern Front developed specialized burn wards. They were never adequate. Morphine supplies ran short. Men with third-degree burns, over 70% of their bodies, lingered for days in unspeakable agony. Some doctors, in unofficial mercy, administered fatal overdoses. By late 1942, veteran German tankers had a saying: "Better a bullet than a brew-up." The German response. Germany's answer to the T-30 was, characteristically ambish: "Build my German Shipbiluk, but the way from Kleck on the Lord of Purpose." Germany's answer to the T-31. German beliefs: better a bullet than a brew-up. Germany's answer to the T-31. Better a bullet than a brew-up. The German response. Germany's answer to the T-31. Better a bullet than a brew-up. German was powerful. German region that German Stefan. Better a bullet than a brew-up. The German response. Germans' answer to the T-31, better a bullet than a brew-up. The German response, Germany's answer to the T-31, better a bullet than a brew-up. Germany's answer to the T-31, better a bullet than a brew-up. The German response, Germany's answer to the T-31, better a bullet than a brew-up. The German response, Germany's answer to the T-31, better a bullet than a brew-up. The German response, Germany's answer to the T-31, better a bullet than a brew-up. The German response, Germany's answer to the T-31, better a bullet than a brew-up. The T-34 was characteristically ambitious, build better tanks. The Tiger I, introduced in late 1942, mounted an 88mm gun and featured armor up to 120mm thick. It could destroy a T-34 at ranges where the Soviet tank couldn't penetrate back. The Panther, introduced in 1943, copied the T-34's sloped armor design, the sincerest form of industrial flattery. It mounted a powerful 75mm gun and theoretically matched the T-34's combination and mobility. Both tanks were magnificent machines. They were also catastrophically complex. The Tiger weighed 54 tons, but used the same transmission designed for a 30-ton tank. Mechanical breakdowns were constant. The Panther's initial versions suffered from engine fires, a grimly ironic reversal for crews who'd watched so many Soviet tanks burn. More critically, Germany couldn't produce them in necessary numbers. A Tiger required 300,000 man-hours to build. A T-34 required 3,000. The Soviet Union produced 84,000 T-34s during the war. Germany built 1,347 Tigers. The mathematics were brutal. For every Tiger destroyed, the Soviets could afford to lose 62 T-34s and still come out ahead. For every German tank ace who knocked out 30 Soviet tanks, the Russians built 90 more. The numbers. 80,000 German tankers died in combat on the Eastern 73. The numbers, 80,000 German tankers died in combat on the Eastern 73. The numbers truly 24 tankers died. The numbers, 80,000 German tankers died in combat. The Russians built 99 more, and the Russians built 1,000 German Tempel in combat. The numbers, 80,000 German tankers died. The Russians built 99 more, and the Russians built 1,000 German Tempel in combat. The numbers, 80,000 German tankers died. The Russians built 99 more, and the Russians built 1,000 German Tempel in combat. The numbers, 80,000 German tankers died. The Russians built 99 more, and the Russians built 1,000 German Tempel in combat. The numbers, 80,000 German tankers died. The Russians built 99 more, and the Russians built 1,000 German Tempel in combat. The numbers, 80,000 German tankers died. The Russians built 99 more, and the Russians built 1,000 German Tempel in combat. The numbers. Now 'tis much more, butting with a total, many of there that had been killed to a truth by German tanks' ears. The Russians built 9 more, and the Russians built 1,000 German Tempel in combat. Not all burned alive. Some were killed instantly by shell penetrations. Some died when their tanks struck mines. Some were captured and perished in Soviet camps. But the majority burned. Wehrmacht casualty records categorized deaths: KIA, killed in action; DOW, died of wounds; MIA, missing in action. For tank crews, there was an additional notation that appeared with disturbing frequency: VFB, verbrannt im Fahrzeug, burned in vehicle. The peak year was 1943. At Kursk, the largest tank battle in history, German Panzer divisions threw themselves against Soviet armor in desperate offensive action. The result? Roughly 760 German tanks destroyed, with crew survival rates in destroyed vehicles averaging 12%. That means approximately 2,700 German tankers died at Kursk alone, most in fires that consumed them before they could escape their burning vehicles. The statistical probability haunted every German tanker. In a Panzer IV facing a T-34, if your tank was penetrated, you had roughly a 1 in 8 chance of your entire crew surviving. Individual survival odds were perhaps 1 in 3. The other 2/3 would die in the initial explosion or the subsequent fire. Veteran crews developed rituals. Some kept hatches partially open during combat, sacrificing protection for escape routes. Others positioned themselves near hatches, ready to bail out at the first impact. A few carried pistols, not for fighting, but for themselves, a bullet being preferable to burning. Oberleutnant Kurt Nispel, the man who started this story, survived that first encounter with a T-34. He transferred to a Tiger unit and became the most successful tank ace in history, with 168 confirmed kills. He understood better than most that numbers on a kill board meant nothing when Germany was losing the war of production. He died in April 1945, not in a fire, but from wounds sustained when his Tiger was knocked out by Soviet artillery. His crew got him out of the burning tank. He died 2 days later in a field hospital. The T-34 he faced in June 1941 probably survived the war. Soviet tanks were repaired, refitted, and returned to service repeatedly. Some T-34s saw action in Korea in the 1950s, still functioning after a decade of warfare. The final accounting isn't really about tanks. It's about the gap between doctrine and reality, between confidence and competence, between what engineers thought war should be and what soldiers discovered it actually was. German tanks were marvels of precision engineering, and that precision meant nothing when Soviet shells punched through their armor at ranges where German guns couldn't respond. German tactical doctrine emphasized maneuver and coordination, and that doctrine failed when Soviet numbers simply overwhelmed German skill. 80,000 German tankers learned this lesson. Most learned it in the last seconds of their lives, when fire filled their fighting compartments and escape hatches suddenly seemed impossibly far away. The Soviet tank designers who Germany had mocked created a weapon perfectly suited to the war they actually had to fight, not the war German generals imagined. Crude welding and cast turrets and cramped crew stations, all those supposed deficiencies, mattered less than sloped armor that deflected shells, wide tracks that conquered mud, and diesel engines that didn't turn penetrated tanks into crematoriums. Wars are won by the side that understands the nature of the conflict. Germany thought the Eastern Front would be a test of tactical brilliance and engineering excellence. The Soviet Union understood it would be industrial murder on a continental scale. 80,000 burning tankers testified to which understanding proved correct.